Hi, good morning, good afternoon. This is Alex Bryant. Appreciate you all attending this webinar. Thank you for attending, and we've got a great set of people, great set of speakers today, a very interesting topic. The focus here is going to be, as we talked about in the introduction and the invitation, about diversifying your supply chain and manufacturing beyond China, and why a lot of companies are selecting Thailand. We're very fortunate today to have David Nardone, the group executive and for the WHA Industrial Development in Bangkok. David's going to be joining us, and we'll have Mark Plum as well. Here on slide 2, you can see the way we're going to lay this out is there's going to be a brief introduction of East West, a brief introduction of WHA, a discussion around the current global supply chain discussion. The webinar, we're going to address four or five points around the economy, the key product sectors, advantages sourcing Thailand, advantages of manufacturing, and the case studies, and then the discussion. And the point of today is going to be that this is a roundtable discussion, and it's not going to be just slides. So we'll go through slides. We'll be taking questions throughout this whole time period. We want to take the questions for housekeeping purposes. Everybody who is on here, if you look, you'll see a point where you can ask questions and type those in. I will get those and I will ask the speakers, and we'll be taking questions throughout this whole process. So with that, I will.
Do you have the slides on, Alex?
I do.
We don't see them.
The slides? Okay.
Okay, it's loading now. Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Sure, certainly. That's pretty important. Can you all see them now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so at that point, I will introduce Mark Plum. Mark, if you would give a brief introduction of East West.
Sure. Hello, guys. So yeah, my name is Mark Plum. I'm a director with East West, and I've been with East West for the last 7 years after I repatriated back from Asia, where I spent the last 25 years in both Thailand and in China. In the last 12, 15 years, those in China, I was president of Briggs & Stratton, where we had 5 manufacturing locations starting from in Japan, China, Philippines, Vietnam. Had, of course, profit and loss responsibility, over 1,000 people, and a very, very, very successful business. And prior to that, I'd lived in Thailand in the early 90s, from 90 to 95, where I was vice president of Trane Air Conditioning, handling all of Indochina, which of course at that time, and then Vietnam, opening the rep office in Vietnam when the embargo was lifted in 93. So pretty good background. And most of us of the senior director staff for East West come from a similar background of many years living in Asia, and senior guys having P&L responsibility for multinationals. And we, Bechtel, Flora, Kodak, et cetera. We really focus on kind of 3 areas, supply chain and operations. And what that says is anything that kind of goes on in the factory or inputs that come into the factory, a really good handle on that. And we have guys who've built and run factories in Asia for many years. Commercial, yeah, we do a lot of market analysis, brand development, product development, sales and marketing, because a lot of us come out of in our early years in that whole business development kind of phase, sales and business, and risk management, which for Asia is really quite critical. The fact that we do a lot of due diligence and supplier audits and things with a team of pretty well trained, does not so much as investigators, and even some police, some ex-police that help us do investigations. And as you can see, we do all these different categories: automotive, I won't read, filtration, electronics, and we do it really in 4 major areas. We're really strong in China, of course, with offices in Shanghai. Southeast Asia, of course, we're in ASEAN, and we have our people in Thailand. Central Eastern Europe, which has been an interesting business for us the last 3-4 years, as Chinese people that have been manufacturing in China and shipping to Europe have with the long supply chains now. We've helped move a couple of them to Eastern Europe, in this case Poland, on two different occasions for manufacturing and sourcing facilities to supply Western Europe. And of course, Mexico with our people down in Monterey, and that's getting a lot of play, because if you're shipping back into the States and you've been in China, maybe Mexico is a better place to be, as you avoid tariffs and your supply chain is much shorter. So that's really our strength of our people and our regionality, and we're able right now, even with COVID, to be able to do projects that maybe other people can't do because we have people in country. So and then at this point, I want to introduce David, and David to talk a little bit about WHA.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Okay, WHA, we're developers. We do industrial estates, logistics properties, utilities like water, wastewater. And we have various joint ventures in the power sector, including gas, coal, a lot of solar recently, and even waste to energy. My background, I'm with the group for 28 years. I was with the predecessor of this group we were acquired 7 years ago. I'm vice chairman of the company. Previously, the older company, I was the CEO for 18 years. Prior to in the development business, my background is manufacturing and finance. I was in the computer business for 15 years. I grew up in Boston. I had assignments in the Massachusetts area, then in Thailand, back in Massachusetts and Hong Kong, and then tried something new in the development industry. We have 6 listed entities, including REIT, so our asset base is about 4.6 billion US. Next slide. For industrial estates, so our business has started in Thailand and more recently expanding to Vietnam. We have 11 industrial estates. They're pretty big. We have about 900 customers, 1,300 factories. The size of these are about 27,000 acres. In general, we're in the eastern part of Bangkok, anywhere from 120 to 180 kilometers, east or southeast of the city. For automotive, it's 32% of our portfolio. That's some 300 factories. And the trend, the recent 20 months or so, we're seeing more in the consumer sector compared to the automotive, but still quite strong. And electronics has become more significant, from 9% going to 20%. Our customer base, Japanese are a large portion of it. It's 32%, but a little bit less so recently. Of course, Thai companies, some of the major manufacturing chemical companies, 17% portfolio. US about 8%, had been as high as 10%. A little bit less. Of course, the last 18 months have been difficult for anyone on expansion, and there's just a massive amount of business coming from China and Taiwan. Those could be Chinese companies, or they could be Chinese OEMs for others. Just to give you a flavor of our estates, these are a few of the factories. This is one of 2 Ford factories with us. They're doing the 1-ton pickup, what you call in the States the Ranger, which would be a half-ton. And then also the Ford Everest. And then they have a second plant with Mazda as a joint venture, where they're doing pretty much the same product. And Mazda is doing primarily passenger cars. And Great Wall Motors had been General Motors, and we just had to change the logo a couple of years ago as GM has sold some of their plants in Asia. With Mazda directly, we have their only transmission plant and their only engine plant outside of Japan. Some of this product goes to Mexico for US market. Consumer product, we have people like Jelly Belly. It's a private company out of California doing, chocolate and Jelly Belly candy. And for electronic, a group Fabrinet, the founders originally came out of Seagate about 20 years ago. They're doing LiDAR, they're doing all types of very sophisticated communication equipment. So this is just giving you a little bit of a sampling of our customer base. On the industrial estates itself, it's a little bit different than the States, where typically the state will bring you the infrastructure. But here we're doing the roads, we're doing the land grading, we're the water company, the wastewater company. We have a smart eco-industrial estate concept using the best environmental care, air quality monitoring, wastewater monitoring, all kinds of initiatives, to have for the customer to have better control, and we have better control, so that you have the same type of safeguards and industry controls where you operate. We're the water company, wastewater company, the fire station. We have all types of design things that we're going through in terms of handling a large amount of water, even though our industrial estates are typically 60, 80 meters above sea level. We normally have natural gas. We have a number of joint venture power companies in the estate where we're doing cogeneration power, and we'll sell power to the grid, but also sell power to the private customers, or steam, or demin water, or even doing reverse osmosis water for wastewater. So lots of innovation happening there. Okay, let me hand it back to Mark at this point.
Sure. Thanks, David. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit now about the kind of the global supply chain and really focus. It's really a focus on China. And quite frankly, for the last 20 years in Asia, China has really been driving it in the changes I want to just step through here quickly. So many of us on this call, I think we all went to China in the early years. Call it after WTO. 2000, 2001, 2002, and went there looking for large domestic markets and really inexpensive labor, and that was great. The market was large and the labor was inexpensive, even though the market was not easy to penetrate. But and then we also were there with the inexpensive labor to have stuff built and to ship back, and a lot of it came back to the United States, of course. About 10, 15, 12, 15 years ago, around 2010, let's say, somewhere in there, the labor rates, because it's top-down driven, the government mandates every year you will increase your salaries by X, has began to rise tremendously, as well as operational costs. So where you went there early on because of really inexpensive labor and cheap and very inexpensive operating costs, that started to change 10 years ago and has changed every year since then. Next slide, please, Alex. So your labor costs have been going up. And then in addition, China then began to put more regulatory complexity. When you went in early, getting a license, getting the Fire Bureau to come out and do things, pretty straightforward, pretty easy. That's changed dramatically as, China has become a little more, I guess, sophisticated. You could say they've been a little more less transparent on how to do things there. And that's been an issue. So then what happened is, now when we first went there, a lot of us, we didn't have much domestic competition. Well, after building stuff there for 10, 15 years, we actually became our own worst enemies, because China then became I would say in some cases, copy us, copy importers, and build up a domestic market to compete against us. So now your domestic market is more difficult because of Chinese manufacturers, and your cost structure has gone up quite a bit. So then the next step was President Xi, I think 6 years ago or so, started what they call China 2025, which is really Buy China initiative, and is kind of a non-tariff barrier sort of initiative. It's basically encourages locals to buy from Chinese-owned companies versus foreign-owned companies. Then the next step, of course, now this has really affected the people who were buying stuff and shipping it back to the States. In 2017, with the duties that went on as high as 25%, that really, so your labor went up, your transparency went up, your volumes went down some cases because of domestic competition. Now what you're bringing in from this China to the States now costs 25% more, and that's because of the duties in 2017. And then the next step, of course, which isn't just China, of course, but now you with COVID and the way China has been so restrictive, and we believe, and from our people that we know quite well in DC, we don't think China is going to be opening up through our sources for free travel for business until the end of 2022. So we're looking at another year at least of not being able to get in and freely into our factories. So that's been a big problem. And then lastly, what all this is, in particular COVID, has really the ports are all clogged up. So we've gone from 4 or 5 weeks on the water to 10, 12 weeks on the water, and our shipping costs, our spot rates have gone anywhere from $3,000 3 years ago up to $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 for a container. So I get the point of the whole slide here is you went to China for one reason 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and all those reasons you went there pretty much are gone now, except if you've established yourself for sales in China, and then you have good brand and distribution. So it's made it much, much more difficult. Next slide, please, Alex. So you have to then you make.
Hey, Mark, excuse me real quick. We had a question already come in. Someone mentioned they have they're sourcing out of China right now. They've been for the last 7 years. They're paying, he says, $20,000 a container. wanted the opinion of, is that going to continue? What is East West, or David, what do you see as far as the container shipping scenario? Is that going to ease back to where it was pre-COVID, or what is the expectation?
Yeah. Let me take a quick whack at it, and then if David has some ideas. So in the short term, no, and when I say short term, we feel it next, and again, through people that we know, next 6 months, those rates are going to stay high. Longer term, we do believe as we get these spikes taken care of, we get the ports opened up, and we get and there's some new container lines coming on, it'll go back down, but we do not believe it's going to get back in the near future of any time to the $3,000 or $4,000 a container that it was historically up until about 2.5, 3 years ago.
Yeah. David, you agree with that?
Yeah, I would only add from what I hear from my customers' perspective that, it's hard to bring on that capacity short term. So they expect this to last into 2023 and then to moderate. But maybe, some of the demand characteristics have increased permanently in terms of sourcing. So like Mark says, you may not get back to that level.
That's right.
Right.
So it's, you know how it is. Once you're taking stuff prices back down is, more difficult. So anyway, so we know we're in China. We know things have changed a lot. And then for a lot of us, people say, well, okay, fine. What do I do? Where would I go if I wanted to expand my supply chain and begin sourcing in other countries? And where would I go if I wanted to put up another manufacturing facility up? And so on the sourcing side, and kind of just generically speaking, depending on what you're in, we always look for countries that have good large markets, appliances, auto, electronics, etc. And typically they have good supply bases. So if you're able to supply the appliance industry, the auto industry, the electronics industry, then there's probably good labor in those countries. There's good skill set in those countries. There's good competitors that not competitors, but people that you can perhaps go and have stuff made for you. So that's what we look for typically when we look for a country, as we will want to begin to look for sources of supply. As when it comes to looking for a place to move manufacturing, again, a lot of it depends where your consumption is. Is it in the USA? Is it in ASEAN? Is it back in China? Is it in Europe? But given all that, you still look for 4 or 5 basic things. You need competitive labor rates. You need competitive land costs. You need a tax structure that you can work with, and maybe get an effective tax structure that's even less than what you have now. You need availability of labor and educated labor. And once you kind of work through those things, whether it's Thailand or it's Poland or whatever, there's 4 or 5, 6 things you really have to have. And depending on where you're going, each country offers a little bit different. So in the case of Thailand, and David's going to talk a lot about this, Thailand is good partners and good friends with the United States. We have the Treaty of Amity, and that really helps us with some economic relations. As we'll talk in a little bit, there's sectors for Thailand for exportation to the U.S. and even domestic consumption. Really, really strong electronics, really strong in automotives, appliances, machinery, healthcare. And now with Hong Kong and different things having some issues, Thailand is really trying to promote themselves with a lot of back office and logistics hubs. Historically, that's been Singapore. Thailand really believes that they can do this, and if you put a factory down there, then they'll help you a lot with this whole logistics hub situation. So those are the kind of the criteria you look when you try to find a new source of supply for components, and or what you're looking for when you want to move a manufacturing facility out of China. And sometimes it seems daunting that I'm in China, how do I get out? Well, if you really step through the process and really do the analysis, and it's really not that difficult. It seems very difficult at first, but once you get into it, you can really break through it, I think, and understand it pretty well. Next slide, please, Alex.
Sure.
So, and I'm going to turn this back over to David in just a minute, but this webinar, we're going to go over things, and then David's we're going to talk about the Thai economy, its exports, and the trade environment. We're going to talk about the key product sectors in Thailand. We're going to talk about advantages from sourcing from Thailand, the advantages for manufacturing in Thailand, and then we're going to go through a couple case studies to show how some other companies have done it and done it very successfully. So with that, I want to turn it back to David to give us some stuff on Thailand.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And with the time I have, I'll just touch on a few of these topics. Let's start with the Eastern Economic Corridor. The next slide, please. So Thailand is its population of 70 million people. The GDP is roughly 500 billion US, and we concentrate on the eastern part of Thailand, what they call the Eastern Economic Community, and it covers 3 provinces for a host of reasons. One, the heavy industry started here with the Mataput port on petrochemical refineries, power plants, gas separation plant, where Thailand has been pretty self-sufficient until recently on natural gas usage. And Lam Chabang port is the 25th or 24th largest in the world, basically. So it's a world-class port. The Dawai port and Sihanoukville reference here, maybe less so. And what we like is the infrastructure development, the targeted industry, the increasing city development and mass transit being, also going through this corridor. For Board of Investment tax incentives, it has the best incentives, as do the industrial estates and the facilitation of investors here. So it's a strategic location, it's excellent investment atmosphere, place to live, place to work, and you have infrastructure linkage and you have supplier linkage because you have a 30-year history of some major industries with a large presence in Thailand. Let's go next slide, please. So here on exports, we're looking on a trend basis. This is in US dollars, so you may have some weakening of the Thai baht. But even with that, the first 7 months of the year, we're up 16% year over year, projected for the year to be about 17% higher and still at a good run rate when you compare it to more normal years in 2018, 2019. Thailand is the largest export partner with the US. And so 34 billion went to the US in 2020, projected this year about 20% growth, and then followed by China and Japan. Thailand has a surplus with the US of about $20 billion, has a significant deficit with China and with Japan. They're about break even. Products that we're exporting that are strategic in Thailand is competitive advantage in automotive, electronic, and a whole host of these supply chains that go with that type of business. And then the historical agro type of products, which is about 8% of GDP, but trying to get higher value add from that. You see like a Thai company is #1 in the world in tuna fish, but also doing, food supplements and such from tuna fish, machinery and equipment. So it's a place that's known for exports and has expertise in the right type of industry for exports. And if your business is in the US or EU or even growing in the region, I mean, that's a reason to be here. This is a good base for export hub for manufacturing. Now, in terms of imports always also going up. So you have the whole restocking. So China is a large importer, as I mentioned, it's about a $30 billion deficit with China. It's a little bit surprising it doesn't get more attention. Japan, slight deficit, EU about break even, US in a surplus situation, and then imports also coming from Malaysia. What are they importing? They're importing fuel. So we have a very limited amount of, we have natural gas, but other oil and such, we have very little. And then chemicals is part of that process, and automotive would be part of the value add process in terms of local market and re-export. So even with some slowdown, maybe after this 7-month figure because of some slight higher disruption in the manufacturing process, both supply base and also pandemic, forecast somewhere about 20% to 22% growth in imports. Let's look at a few of these industries. Let's automotive. So this is a really important industry for Thailand. The global market in 2020 was 78 million units. This is down from about 100 million units. So it had dropped for 2 years up to 2020. Thailand ranked number 11 for production with 1.4 million units. They had produced as high as 2.2 million. So the capacity is there with the #1 producer in ASEAN. And for consumption, number 16 globally, about 800,000 units in 2020. This year, be some slight growth. And but that consumption had been as high as 1.2 million units. So Thailand is best in terms of half production for export and then for local market. The key products, okay, it's small passenger cars. So there's some incentives that are new in terms of the plug-in hybrids, EVs and such. But it's a global leader in terms of the small pickup market, going to 130 countries from here. And then we see factors that are happening. So the recovery of the trading partners, the exports will recover. the microchip shortage probably takes some time to work out. Maybe Thailand is slightly less impacted because of the sophistication of the vehicle and the amount of electronics is less in the small vehicles, less in the pickup trucks, and the COVID-19 disruption is turning the corner, and the country is ready to open in November. Now, when we're looking at Thailand, it's exciting of the 2 million units and such on production, then we want to come back to reality. So we do a lot of comparison and analysis on some of the mature large markets. And when we look at the size of the market for China, it's daunting. The GDP is 29 times larger than Thailand. There's export business moving to Thailand, expanding to Thailand, expanding with existing companies here that are expanding their footprint. But China exports are 10 times larger than Thailand, and there's a lot of synergy in terms of vehicles, machinery, rubber, tire companies. So it's just bigger numbers. The companies come here; they're really large in size. They're industry leaders, but they're also small companies coming from China, coming from Taiwan too. So it's some mixed, and we believe there'll be a surge in business as the travel opens up again with China and the U.S. and for ourselves, we're preparing for it. So we say one drop becomes a flood. That's what we see, the significance of this movement of companies that are Chinese companies or Chinese OEMs, the U.S. manufacturers, or they're U.S. or European, or other companies that are expanding the footprint and saying, well, we have 2 plants in China, we want another one, we'll have this one in Thailand. It's not necessarily relocation. Electronics, also a key industry for Thailand. Thailand is number 2 in the world on exports of hard disk drives. Western Digital with 3 factories here, Seagate with 2 significant factories here, and then other electronic exports. So number 14 in the world in terms of electronic export. So much, I think, where people wouldn't expect compared to like China and the Malaysia markets, as an example. Now those destinations are varied. They're the US or EU, back to China, ASEAN, and Hong Kong. Hong Kong could represent China and another host of different transshipment locations.
David, we had a question. David,
Sure.
I'm sorry, we had a question come in on the just wrote somebody here is they've got a manufacturing site in China, and they are a chemical manufacturer, and they were the question was they had read a fair amount about the Thai chemical market. It's the large exporter. It's like the top 15 export of chemicals in the world. Can you talk a little bit about the chemical sector in Thailand, the resin sector of the chemicals?
Yeah, there's the heavy part of the industry, which starts in Mataput with 2 refineries that had been Shell, and Esso has one also in Sriracha, but in Mataput area, 2 big refineries, mostly owned by PTT, the Petroleum Authority of Thailand, and also gas separation plant. There you have an integrated chemical process. We have 1 location there. Land is short there, frankly. So if you have to be integrated to the gas supply and to the heavy industry, then there is land, but it's limited there for expansion. But if you're like the mid-tier and you're doing something for the automotive market, some type of specialty chemical, you may be within 100, 50 to 100 miles in that ring from that industry. And if you're not taking direct feedstock of upstream chemical, for instance, then there's a host of that type of activity. For chemicals, it's one of the the bigger customer base for us, probably about 10% of our customer base. So well over 100 companies.
Okay, great, thank you.
Tax and non-tax incentives. So under the Board of Investment, which is a really straightforward group that I've dealt with, myself for 35 years, I guess, that you could expect somewhere between 3, 5, and 8 year tax holiday, depending on the type of industry, the value add you have, and if you're one of the focus of them. They want more value add. They want higher level of manufacturing. They want more technology as part of that, as many people are looking for. And then depending, you may or may not get like a 50% tax break for the next 5 years. The normal income tax rate is 20% here. There are some schemes on lower personal income tax on smart visas. Not that many people get them, frankly. And some of the visa things can be, a little bit of a nuisance sometimes. But the BOI will administer visas. IEAT has it. They're easy to get. Foreign workers in general are welcome here. One big advantage in Thailand compared to all of our neighbors, freehold land. So you must have a Thai registered company. but you can be 100% foreign, and that's under the promotion under the Board of Investment or under the Industrial State Authority of Thailand, not really the Treaty of Amity. The Treaty of Amity is more on the type of business you're allowed to do, and typically deals with selling in the local market. So you can be promoted by BOI or not. If you're an industrial state, you can have 100% foreign shareholder of a Thai entity, and that's really significant. So you're not forced on having local partnerships that maybe aren't good for you because you're exporting and you have transfer pricing and other things you don't want to complicate. Let me go to the next slide. It's kind of a summary document.
And Mark, I think on this slide here, I think one of your presentations is going to be you and David work together on a company that was getting, I think, 8 years of no tax.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Actually, we had between WHA, BOI, and our client company. It was in going back about 3 years now, very successful and it's quite interesting. Actually, we'll talk about it in a little bit.
Okay, so positives of Thailand: the infrastructure is good, and the logistics are good. The roads they're being worked on all the time. The government's put a lot of money there to keep on improving it. The port is expanding, but it's a world-class port, top 25. They have capacity. The airport also great, but at a high capacity, or it was while we had tourists, and they're expanding that also. Rail, not so much for goods because of close proximity, but the rail is expanding in terms of mass transit, high-speed rail, connecting even up through China. Power supply, we just take it for granted here. We're a little bit surprised on the recent disruptions that you see in China on unavailability of power, partly because of coal or environmental or other reasons, seem to come up quite suddenly. Thailand has a surplus about 30% of power. We have 2 plants that sell under the grid. One is 700 megawatt gas. It's been hardly running the last 2 years. We get paid for capacity, but unfortunately for me, not for water, because they don't need the capacity. So there's lots of power here. It's a high level of self-sufficiency for natural gas, but you can also supplement that with import of LNG, which is really readily available in the Middle East. Utility supply is good. We're the water company, we're the wastewater company, but we're also taking our water from a grid, from the government on a whole grid of reservoirs. So you have a good dependability, even though you have, some extremes of weather off and on in terms of drought, flood, whatever. Communications are good. We run fiber to the factory, there's data centers, there's all kinds of capabilities. You have a huge industry cluster of electronic, of appliances, of automotive. They feed each other. You may find a supplier that's doing something for a different industry, but you need a foundry, you need casting, you need aluminum, plastics, injection molding, whatever. All of that you can find here. The industrial states are great. We think we're the best, but there's lots of good ones. The government policies are stable. The Board of Investment, the EEC policy, IEAT, freehold land, or even the rules and regulations in terms of setting up your business, getting your permit to like occupy the land to do business, getting a building permit and getting your operating permit, one stop. Things that we took for granted until we went to other markets like Vietnam. Capital markets, borrowing costs here are low. They're competitive with the US. And if you're a listed company, you can borrow, bonds, and you can do real estate trusts and a host of things. For foreign companies, if you're larger, it's easier. If you're not, you may use your banking relationship from the US and leverage that and borrow in the local market. And ease of doing business, you can set up a business. It's easy to do business here. Whether you make money, depends how clever we all are, I guess. Areas for improvement, like everywhere. Everyone's looking for higher skilled labor because you have more requirements with automation, with Internet of Things, with 5G or digital, transformation, which we've all been working on with the free time we have in the pandemic. Labor mobility. So within ASEAN, the goods are moving, but the people are not moving. The professional people, we could really use more labor mobility, so that if you want, 50 programmers out of Philippines because you're doing a, deep learning type of business, which they have here, like people like Agoda, for instance, that employ 1,000 foreigners, that you have just an easier mobility. And Thailand's demographics are a little bit unfavorable. So this is not a labor intensive, lowest cost business, but it's a very reasonable cost business. And for me, it's a great place to do business.
Great.
Okay, so I'll leave it and hand it back to Mark. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, David. As I said, and just to reiterate, I've been, started in Thailand in 1990, and it is, quite frankly, a great place to do business. And what we say a lot of times is Thailand was China before China was China, meaning about everything that you see produced in China was produced in Thailand before, and a lot of it moved up there. So really very sophisticated manufacturing base going back 25, 30 years. So we're going to go through 2 case studies. The first one we're going to talk is really, if you're in China, you're having stuff sourced, you're sourcing a lot of components out of China, but you want to diversify out of China. And the second one's going to be is a case study that we did where you're manufacturing in China and you decided because of duties and other things and labor costs that maybe it's time to add another factory, and it doesn't necessarily have to be or should be in China. So next slide, please, Alex.
Oh, look, Mark and Dave, we had a question came in that just said, what are the labor rates in Thailand compared to China?
So
yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, I'll give you the 20,000 foot, and David can give you much more detail. But typically, manufacturing labor rates in Thailand as compared to China are about half.
Yeah, I would only add that I guess it depends on the location in China, but certainly China now is more expensive. If you had a factory labor, for instance, you'd be looking at the minimum wage is $300 a month, but you have 1 or 2 months bonus, and then you have fringe and such. So you'd be looking at $500 to $600 a month, maybe a little bit more. And then people want overtime; they want the chance to work more. Engineers, depending on the level, say 1,000 would be the entry level one, then maybe 3,000 a month. Accountants similar. Then management varies. You have to pay for good management, to do what you want. And you may supplement that with people that know your product, know your process. So it's reasonable. When the labor is cheap, everything else doesn't work. Then the infrastructure is bad, so you're paying somewhere else.
Yeah. Right. No, yeah, exactly. And then you're right. And when it comes in of course, China along the coast, you're over $1,000 a month. If you want to go inland further, to David's point, you want to go out to Sichuan province, etc. You might get some less expensive labor, but then you pay for it through through infrastructure and things of that nature. So, but yeah, Thailand is very competitive, and more importantly, it's a well-educated workforce, and back on this case. So we have a client of ours having a third party make some PC boards and some components with two main facilities, Chinese owned in China. A lot of the components that went into these boards were coming from Singapore, Malaysia, etc. This company was not one of the huge guys. They made a kind of a sophisticated 3-level board that didn't have huge high skill, fairly low output, but a diversified product mix. So you needed to have it a good workforce is what I'm trying to say. The workforce they employ over 15% engineers, so a lot of local engineering. Most of where they're sourcing these components and the finished PC board most of it was coming back to the USA. Some was staying in China. They wanted to diversify out of China for all the reasons we talked about. There's geopolitical concerns. Their board of directors was getting nervous with China and what happens with the relationships between both countries. Then of course the shorter term stuff is the labor costs are going up, operations are more difficult. But the geopolitical and the board was really driving this, that they needed to broaden their footprint. We were brought in. We were asked to and look at ASEAN and specifically Thailand because of the large electronics base in there. And we of course we supported looking at Thailand, Mexico because of the proximity to the USA, and then Poland where we have good knowledge and they thought maybe some stuff would go back to Western Europe. We shortlisted both Thailand and Mexico. We selected Thailand for a variety of reasons. Mexico was good as it came to logistics and to consumption in the States, but besides that, for this particular product, PCB boards, where logistics and freight costs and things are less problematic, Thailand was the winner hands down with all the component suppliers, with all the technology, largest electronics, in Southeast Asia. Labor costs were very competitive. Inflation, Thailand, it's not like in China or Vietnam where every year the government says you're going to go up 8-10%. It's market driven, and Thai guys and the government are pretty smart. And when it comes to trying to keep the labor costs in line based on market input, not just government dictates. And of course, good suppliers, well-trained, educated. So all in all, a winner. Next slide, please, Alex. So we selected Thailand. We selected 2 suppliers. Over the first 15 months, able to reduce costs by about $2 million, and that was because we were dealing with a couple local suppliers who obviously have lower labor costs than their other suppliers had in China, and also a couple of these guys were foreign invested, BOI invested companies, and they had receiving some tax benefits, which also lowered their operating costs. So we were able to move our guys to a couple manufacturing firms in Thailand who had lower labor costs and a lower tax base, which allowed them to be more competitive. And then certainly by moving from China to Thailand, we were able to avoid the U.S.-China tariffs, which was a significant savings. And of course, as David pointed out in one of his slides, a highly trained and educated workforce in the electronics industry going back 20-25 years. So very successful project, moving a source of supply from China to Thailand.
Mark, we had a question pop up, and again, we've got a couple questions that have come forward now. So again, you all see the questions. Please feel free to continue to send them in. We're trying to get to all the questions if we can. Those we cannot get to, we will answer after this event. Another question popped up on this webinar, talking about the sourcing side of it. Question, this is an industrial manufacturer. Question is, in Thailand, what's the labor situation as far as skill set and availability? And I assume he's talking about engineers or qualified workforce.
David, you might want to.
Yeah, let me take that. I mean, some of the industries are a little bit more mature, like the chemical industry or the auto industry. We were doing at a peak 2.2 million units, is down to 1.4 million. So though there's more people coming in, the labor supply is quite good. And for engineers, high availability. The vocational schools, we have some close to us, so you can also have that labor pool. A lot of the management people relocate from Bangkok and end up living in the EEC. But like anywhere, for the management part, you have to work hard and to have a good program on why people should work for you, particularly if you're a small company. But on the other hand, it lets you differentiate. You're a foreign company. You can differentiate a little bit your business and your culture and attract people. So I think it's readily available workforce.
All right, we had another question came in on that, which was same company was talking about the difference between, as far as Thailand and Vietnam. They're trying to source product in the industrial machinery business, and they're trying to look into the labor in both Thailand versus Vietnam.
Yeah, so I mean, Vietnam is cheaper, as much as half the cost. Although the cost is rising quicker. Partly, like Mark said, is could be driven by changes in the minimum wages, but it's also driven by higher concentration of manufacturing close to Ho Chi Minh, close to Hanoi, and those people have started to move out into other places where there's a larger labor base. Like for us, a lot of the electronic business is around Hanoi, and it's moving down into Nha An. We're about 280 kilometers south of there, because Nha An and Thanh Hoa will have 2 more industrial zones coming up with the 3rd and 4th largest labor base. So you're moving and you're not going to be around the city. So it will get more expensive, but certainly it's lower cost. It's a good quality of labor. The people are hardworking. Their English language is good for the professional staff. But Thailand, has other advantages because the infrastructure and the supply base are just much more developed, and you don't have changes in the laws and consistency. So there's some trade-off, and it depends, the type of business you're doing. If you're highly labor intensive, then Vietnam may be better if you're hiring 10, 20, 30,000 people. Like one of the Apple suppliers, we have Gore-Tech. But if you're more intent on the developed supply line and infrastructure and stability of business, then Thailand may be a better choice for you. So I think you have to look and look at, okay, how much is the labor savings? Is it so significant compared to maybe some other advantages on supplier. But Vietnam is coming up on other industries, so we expect it's going to continue to improve, and we expect a lot of our customers will be in both markets if they're not already. And you'll have certain products in Thailand, you'll have other things in Vietnam based on some of the advantages of labor, or maybe it's metal or other type of things that you're sourcing.
Well, that kind of prompts another question. We got one from some automotive manufacturer on the line, and wanted to know specifically around in Thailand, the availability for steel, aluminum foundry, steel costs. Is all that, the assumption is that's all available given there's such a large automotive sector and appliance sector. But is that, if you talk about low cost steel in Thailand or foundries, what's available, aluminum foundries? Can you talk to that point a little bit?
Yeah, there's aluminum foundries, there's casting, there's forging. We have 2 steel plants in our industrial estate that are doing the outer body steel for automotive. And then there's also, steel like construction bar, hot rod, not anything like the capability in China, obviously. So some of the steel is imported before it's transformed, but you can get outer body, you can get wire rod. There's aluminum smelting, 1 or 2 companies. But a lot of that is, commodity driven pricing. So it's not going to be that the source of steel is cheaper necessarily, maybe the transformation or electricity or the labor, other things involved, and being close to your market where you use it.
Well, I think for this person asking the question was really they wanted to make sure they're sourcing their manufacturing products using steel, and they wanted to be able to understand some of the advantages of it, what Thailand had to offer in that area. If Thailand even had foundries, they had aluminum foundries, they had steel capability. So you're
They
saying
have
they
some,
did. Yeah.
yeah. So if they send more information, I mean, we can both help them steer them where some of these suppliers are.
Sure, yeah, because they've got such a large appliance business, automotive, right? Then another question, but just popped up, which was asking about the rule of law in Thailand compared to China. And that's a pretty broad question, but I was trying to ask both of you that.
Well,
I can. Go ahead, Mark.
All the David handled the Thai piece, of course. All of us have been in China for a long time. It's sometimes a moving target, and you have policies that get changed rather quickly based on local, provincial, or even government Beijing regs. And again, those of us have been there. The expression is Beijing is high, and Beijing is far away, and local is local, meaning the local people can have a lot of influence and give you some issues that Beijing doesn't even know about. So that can be difficult at times. And then David can speak about Thailand, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the Thailand laws have been pretty consistent because you're relying on other things like the Board of Investment Promotion Privileges, the IEAT, the Bank of Thailand in terms of currency and such. Labor laws, okay, they're favored to the labor, but they don't change so much, and they're not anything draconian. Customs, maybe some people have some complaints on classification or fines, but they're automating also. And the other thing, you're not competing with the state, so the state is not in business against you. They do have control of the electricity distribution, but not all the generation anymore. And PTT is a oil company. There are other people in that business, and you don't have any type of expropriation. There's private public partnership, which hasn't been that great, and maybe some of the earlier history with that wasn't that favorable. But I think it's a place you can do business. You don't have to worry about the laws changing all the time.
Yeah, and just real quick on that note, David, he brought up something. You're not in Thailand. You're not competing against Thailand Inc. like you are. Sometimes it's China Inc. and that's the government supporting of sometimes your competitors, which can be very, very difficult.
Fair point. Okay. Okay. And then the last question was around sourcing again. The question was right now the big advantage for this person looking at it is that Thailand doesn't have the 25% tariffs that China does. And the question was, do either one of you think that Thailand would the U.S. government would ever put on those tariffs like they have with China?
Oh,
Well, yeah, David, you may want to handle that, huh?
yeah, yeah. I mean, they have some tariffs. There's been, those tariffs are initiated from the U.S. based on some perception of, market dominance or subsidized pricing and anti-dumping. So they've had it before on pineapple. They have it on tuna fish. So you see the largest company had bought, many of the U.S. tuna and fish companies and ones from Europe also. For tires, the Chinese companies came in heavily. They're producing here. We've been to their factories. They're sourcing the rubber here, but also accused on anti-dumping. So there was duties put on. Same on this Chinese manufacturing group came in doing mattresses using rubber, then had some duty. So I think when you go to another country, you can't go just because of tax or duty. It should be a business case also. And sometimes these are imposed, and to me they don't seem fair because they haven't kind of proved their point before they implement that. So you want to be in more than one market. You want to have a solid business based on the merits of your manufacturing and how you do business. And Thailand does have a surplus with the U.S. It's not huge. The Vietnam surplus is much more. I think the U.S. has looked at that, trying to let these countries develop and to get established. And compared to the surplus with China, it's probably less sensitive until they see that it's Chinese companies that are making these goods and exporting and maybe taking advantage of other countries. The manufacturing that's coming here, it is real content. It's not putting a label, in Cambodia or somewhere and shipping. This is real manufacturing. So you have to rely on that on how you do business.
Yeah, and I think given the relationship between those two countries, the China situation is quite different than putting on tariffs in Thailand.
But David's exactly right. Sometimes Thailand's been a beneficiary, as we know, and the USA put those before the steel they put them on appliances out of China, which was really designed to protect Whirlpool, quite frankly, in the States. And so what happened is a lot of manufacturers in China moved to Thailand, and now that's one of the reasons Thailand's appliance business has really done so well. And but you have to be careful. You just can't chase cheap labor, and you just can't chase tax incentives. It has to be a solid business case. Is what I think David was really referencing.
Sure.
Yeah, the other difference, Alex, the other difference is those duties are being like specific by product based on some perception of unfairness on the product. It's not a retribution against the country, where the China tariff is just like an arbitrary one. So we don't see that type of tariff coming here whatsoever because Thailand's not so significant in terms of the size of the economy, the exports, to make that kind of difference, being 1/10 the export base of China and that product going to many other countries, even though, a third of it maybe is going to the States or less. Less, maybe 20%.
And there's such a long history between our two countries. We had another question popped up. What's the availability of, and this is a little more specific, what's the availability of stainless steel in Thailand for food or medical grade products compared to carbon steel from China? That may be a little more specific, and we can get an answer to that. But I wanted to lay it out to both of you if you all had an immediate comment on it.
Yeah, there's stainless steel available, but on the particular grade for the product, I don't want to say offhand. I think we need to look at it closer.
Okay, for the person who asked that question, we'll be reaching out to him directly. All right,
Okay.
Mark, so I'm sorry, I will let you get to the second case study, but you will please keep asking the questions.
Yeah, now this is a manufacturer, and this is really where, so again, as I said, I've been in Thailand since, lived there from 90 to 94, 95, but this is where David and I really met up about 3-4 years ago on this particular project. And this project was a combination of East West and our client, David and WHA and the Thai Board of Investment. So what this was a U.S. company that had a manufacturing facility in Fujian. They could see, goes back about 4 years now, that the beginning they have some relationship issues with the states. Their costs have gone up. They had some labor problems going on. The supply chain was getting longer. Everything just wasn't, and they were in a kind of a landlocked facility, so they had to make a decision. Do they go further west, where David referenced that, where the labor is a little less expensive, say out to Sichuan province, And does that help out? Does that help them out, and they can expand their facility because their business was really doing well. And they asked us to, originally came to us and asked us to do a site study for them in China, and we did, and we basically, but then we started looking at it. Then we found out and started talking to them about where their consumption of most of their product was, and a lot of it was not in China. So then we said, well, why don't we? But it wasn't Asia; it was in ASEAN. So we said, why don't we take a look at a broader study, and let's take a look at China, of course, because you're already there. And it's interesting. So many of the management now that's less than 40 years old, 45 years old, when it comes to Asia, all they know is China. They weren't there before China. So they don't know the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, because they've been focused on China. So we said, let's take a look at what might be the best place for you. So in addition to China, we did a study on Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. And the matrices you're looking for, as I talked about earlier, what's the labor structure? What's the labor rates? How's the supply chain? How's the labor availability? What's the tax structure? How's the government? How's the transparency? There's 8 or 10, 15 matrices that you work yourself through. And with their product and the fact that there's so much of what was staying in ASEAN, we said, hey, we think the best place for you to be is Thailand. And they were, in this particular company was really number one in the world in their industry. This was a pretty big deal. We then began to work with David as it became to where should the facility be, and what's the land costs, and how far from Utapao, or how from Lachaban port, what's the availability. David helped us go out, and we met a lot of local supply. We went and worked to talk to large guys, the Caterpillars of the world, the Cummins of the world, with those introductions. Got to really meet those people. We decided then this is a place to be. We found David helped us with a piece of land. I think it was 50 ha. Yeah, and we put a 400. Yeah, their acres, a 400,000 square foot facility, employing about 300 people. Then we of course we managed the whole thing because this company didn't have the resources on the ground. So we of course we did that. We went with a design and engineering firm, the number one design engineering firm in Thailand. We went to the number one or number two general contractor. We had project managers. We worked closely with the BOI. And on that note, when I was saying, when we work closely with David on land, then we work very closely with the Board of Investment. And Board of Investment really helped us as far as saying, hey, this is the kind of things that Thailand's looking for. And we had then decided, well, let's go ahead and bring our engineering lab here too, which was something that the board wanted. And we'd already had a lot of Internet of Things products within our products. So between WHA and David and Thai Board of Investment and our local project management, we built the factory. And then these are some of the things that were the outcome. And for example, with working closely with the Thai BOI, we got an 8-year corporate income tax holiday, meaning no income tax, no 20% Thai income tax for 8 years, and 50% for 5 years, or only 10%. And that was critical because in China, quite frankly, China's not offering that much anymore. So when they had done their original models, and had they stayed in China, they were planning on paying the full 25% Chinese corporate income tax. So significant promotion that the BOI was very helpful on. Also, by moving out of China and a lot of the stuff that was going back to the States, we were able to avoid a significant amount of tariff that was going back to the States after the 2017 tariffs were put in from China to the USA. And we were able to manage it quite well, where as we brought on the Thai facility, we were able to shut down the Chinese facility. So so as far as operating costs, now these costs were all came from our client who had originally put his business model together to stay in China. So everything would have been, all these comparisons are, had they stayed in China, what would have been, and now going to Thailand. So they stayed in Thailand versus China. Over 10 years, they anticipated $22 million savings in tax. Had they stayed in China as compared now going to Thailand, they anticipate over 5 years of 4.3 million in annual labor savings because the labor is less expensive in Thailand. And had they stayed in China versus Thailand, they were able to, because of some local raw materials, steel in this one case, able to save 1.8 million as had they stayed in China. And then lastly, compared to had they stayed in China versus Thailand, they were able to increase their forecasts, their sales forecast, 42% over 5 years being in Thailand versus China, and they increased their revenue 53% based on all of the operating cost input reductions in Thailand as had they stayed in China with the additional facilities. So all in all, a very successful project, really driven by Thailand, WHA, and the Thai Board of Investment.
Look, we got one final question. We got another one popped up. Says if U.S. company sources from Thailand, right? They could either be sourcing from a Thai supplier in Thailand, a U.S. supplier in Thailand, or they could be sourcing from a Chinese supplier in Thailand. Do you all see any issues if someone sources from a Thai supplier that is owned by a Chinese company?
Now, David, you want?
Not particularly. Like I'm thinking of the earlier question on carbon steel. We have a Chinese company under construction for carbon steel because it's quite high end and hard to get. If they're not locked into some supply base that that they don't want to supply a competitor or something in the same market, may be a problem. But in general, no. And the automotive market. So you have the U.S. European companies that are part of that tier one supply, but they also heavily rely on having some local Thai companies that develop capabilities in metal or plastics, and that may or may not have joint ventures for different types of technology. So I think that's part of the whole, infrastructure in terms of the supply base for competitiveness. And you should look at all of that as potential sources.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I know we're a little over, but I wanted to get another question in. We are now at the conclusion of this. It's 11:03. I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to thank David Nardone for calling in from Bangkok, Mark Plum, and East West. I want to thank you all for the people who signed up and registered. If you have any questions, please let us know. We will be forwarding a recording of this webinar along with the detailed presentation for you all to review. Thank you very much, and this now concludes today's webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Huh.
Okay, how do I get out?
Let me just stay on for a second, see what the attendees, what happens here.